We start our journey of the Jones family in the Tackett Street Chapel in Ipswich, Wales, where Eliezer Jones, my great-great-grandfather, was a minister. His son, Algernon Sidney Jones, was born on August 11th, 1852, in the same town. We know he was one of 12 or 14 children. Records do not exist of the entire brood of children. Suffice to say, Eliezer was a busy minister. Algernon was my great-grandfather. In 1873, Algernon emigrated to the United States at the age of 21, where he worked on a sheep ranch in Lake County, California. This is our connection to Cache Creek and Clear Lake, where a pier is named after him, Jones Pier. After marrying Harriet Tower Hast in 1885, Algernon moved to Mexico to superintend a mining operation at Los Prietos. It was in Mexico, in 1888, that Algernon Sidney Jones, Jr. was born, my grandfather. They made the journey back to the Bay Area by mule and rail. Back in the day, little boys had very long hair. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's Hattie with her children Harriet and my grandfather Sid on the right. Humiliating. The family moved to a home on Lower B Street in Hayward. Algernon Sidney Jones had made a comfortable fortune in Mexico and invested the money in a lumber business with his brother-in-law, Reginald Mills. This picture was taken around 1904, about the time the Jones family moved to a ranch just outside of Hayward. In 1908, the Jones family moved to Castro Valley. Sitting at left is Algernon. Standing in the middle is grandfather Sid and Harriet at far right. Algernon Sidney Jones died in 1960 at the age of 63. He was a proud, hard-working, and honest man. Sid Jones, my grandfather, became an engineer after serving in World War I, then turned his attention to road construction. He was a talented engineer. We are the Jones family, a diverse group whose past occupations range from captains, legislators, U.S. Marshals, gold miners, engineers, and ministers. I can't say the Jones family of today was molded by our recent ancestors to the extent that we have flourished, as some of them surely have. But I am guessing that the unique sense of humor instilled in all of us today must have come from them. This is the story where we Joneses came from, and most importantly, who we are today, and how we became such a twisted and eccentric group who is still trying to figure out how to dress properly.
Got a snap in my fingers, got a rhythm in my walk. As the elephants say, I'm living in a great big way. Got a handful of nothing, and I watch it like a hawk. Well, I'm doing okay, I'm living in a great big way. I'm the salt in the ocean, I'm the sun up in the sky. I'm a Franklin D. Roosevelt, I'm $1 million long as I've got a snap in my fingers, got a rhythm in my walk, got the devil to pay for living in a great big way. Got a snap in my fingers, got a rhythm in my walk. As the elephants say, I'm living in a great big way.
Well, Well, I grew up without a mother, so I had a nurse take care of me, who lived with us in the house. This was in East 14th Street in Hayward. And my aunt periodically took care of me, but I had a full-time nurse who raised me. My father was very disappointed because he was a duck hunter, fisherman, and all these other things, and we had trouble baiting the hook.
And then of course we'd go to cast them in and they would catch on a tree. And then he would really start swearing. He got totally disgusted. We were incompetent fishermen too. It was pathetic. He was a stern father, but there was no nonsense too. And this is the way he was raised. He was put to work when he was 16. So his memory was, we're going to have 2 years more of a free ride. Why not?
Well, we went to the Mattole River, and we went to Tahoe, and we went to the Eel River. Those would be my main recollections of camping. He was very proud of me because I caught my first fish with a fly. He thought that was such a big deal. He was a great fisherman and hunter. He really enjoyed that, the outdoors. He always wanted his sons to be great fishermen and hunters, but that just wasn't in the books. I don't know about Art. Maybe later on he did, but.
I hated it. I don't like fishing, I don't like hunting, I don't like camping, but he loved it. He'd go duck hunting every day of the season. He loved duck hunting. He'd come home, and guess who got to clean the ducks? It was the worst chore I've ever had in my life, but I did it for him, and and I hated the taste of duck.
And I got a shirt for Christmas, or maybe it was birthday, and Creighton got $100 and I got a shirt. So I used that as a bitch through most of life.
One of the quirks my father had was he loved to talk to himself. He just loved to talk to himself. And if you really had to study and listen hard as to what he was saying to know who he was talking to, because he really was usually bawling somebody out. He was having a conversation where he was chewing somebody out, and then, he'd start laughing at the end of it and say, I guess I told you, or something along that line, and maybe a little crueler words than that. But it was how he, stress relief, I'm sure it was.
Yeah, he was a great guy, very funny. And while I was in college, I was a chauffeur for him one summer. We had a ball. We were up at Tahoe a lot of the time. And, became pretty close to him during that period.
We were up at Lake Tahoe, and we were staying with Dad. It was during that time Bruce said he was driving for Dad. And I went up there towards the end of the summer. I had a summer job and joined them. And we'd been out drinking, the three of us, and we got back to the cabin, and he opened up. Talked about how he felt about her and how much he missed her. I mean, this is years after he'd go on. She was a school teacher, and she was working, but she was going to be able to give that up, and, we lost her. We had a house right on the lake, and with a porch, and we all slept out on the porch. And just south of us, on the lakefront, they had one of the main sets for Rosemarie, which was a Jeanette MacDonald, Nelson Eddy movie. And they were big stars, and their movies were very popular in those days. Anyway, they had one scene, and if you see the movie, you'll notice it. Nelson Eddy is in a canoe with Jeanette, and he's singing Rosemarie to her. And they were right in the middle of that take when Dad was awakened on the porch. And Bruce and I just slept through this, because I just heard the story the next day. And he went charging. He didn't really go charging because we were right there on the water. And he screamed, for Christ's sake, shut up. He was not a movie fan, and the take was obviously ruined. Now, some of that maybe is a little exaggerated, but apparently it happened.
Las Vegas, Reno. We spent a lot of time at Tahoe because my father was a contractor up in that area.
Well, we're going Hayward, and then we're going Reno, and then back to Hayward.
We probably spent the longest time growing up in Piedmont, I would say. About 5 or 6 years, I think, but we had several houses there. Not several, but a couple of houses.
And that's where we were there, as I believe Bruce mentioned, for probably about 6 years. And then we were sent, speaking of rejection as a young person, 2 years to private school. And then Dad bought the ranch in Napa. And we moved back there for 1 year. I finished high school at a school that I just started.
It was lousy because you were constantly changing schools. And so that was kind of a lousy, you know, you always had to make new friends.
In Piedmont, we were both had reached a comfort level because of Dad and the paving thing. And that's why they did finally put us in private school. I mean, it wasn't all rejection.
We went to a school called the Tamalpais School for Boys, and I was there 3 or 4 years. Played basketball at Tamalpais School. Otherwise, I wasn't that good an athlete, really.
I finished school in Napa. That's where we finally ended up as a family living together. After Napa, everybody dispersed.
I liked Piedmont the best of all, really, because I had just begun, I'd grown up with the kids that I went to school with, and it was the longest period of time.
We purchased that house, I believe it was at the beginning of 1944, and then Arthur was born a few months later. So he took over all my, I had all the center stage till he was born.
And one time, I don't have this any longer, but I recorded on tape. I recorded him leaving the house. Gets up to his barn, so I said, I gotta go get some more recording of this. So I took my recorder, big old hunky thing, took it up, plugged it in on the plug on the outside of the barn, got by the window where his office was. The window was up at the top of the room because the barn was built semi-underground. And so I held the microphone and recorded the rest of his conversation with whomever he was talking to, and it sounded like it was something to do with the property in Arizona. He was mad at somebody about something. And he had a shoe box, and he kept shoe shine cloths and kits and stuff in there, and a bottle of Early Times. He was sneaking drinks when he wasn't supposed to be. This was about 3 in the afternoon, as I recall. Just before dinner, he was going to pour his nightly drink, and I said, Pop, haven't you already had yours today? He looked at me and said, you've been snooping on me? And I said, well, yeah. He said, laughed, and he said, don't do that. You know, I got to have some secrets in my life, son.
Well, we had a barn, and he made an office in this barn, and it had like a plywood floor, and then he had his desk in there and his file cabinets and his safe. And so he'd keep his little bottle of hooch in the safe, and then he'd go up there and have a little drink and have a good time. And then if he was mad at somebody, he'd sit there and say da 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 da, and if you'd look in the window, you'd hear him doing all this. And then the next day they'd come over to visit, and he'd act like they were his best friend.
When my grandmother Maestrick and my Aunt Dode came from Omaha, Nebraska, and they spent Christmas with us.
And we had Dorothy. Remember Aunt Dorothy? This would be Edna's sister, who took care of Sandy's grandmother. And she was really a very difficult woman. And if Dad had made a pass at her, we would have all been embarrassed, but he didn't.
And Papa Sid makes a pass at my grandmother.
I think Sandy got nervous, as only she can. But fortunately, it never blossomed into a romance. But they were there. I think we stayed overnight, yeah, up at the old ranch house at Napa. That was great.
I was the first girl born, and the older brothers were quite a bit older. And so anyway, when we lived in Oakland or Piedmont, we had a backyard, and I guess my mother took a lot of movie pictures of me, and so I was always having all the pictures taken, I guess, because I don't know why. But anyway, there were a lot, and so Creighton always rubbed it in later on. He would, every time I had a boyfriend in high school, he would have to show these nude pictures of me that were taken when I was 3 to my boyfriends, which really embarrassed me sometimes. But finally I got over it. He's still showing them, so what's the difference?
My parents moved to Napa in 1943, and I was born in 44. Lived there until until 1964, when both of my parents had died. It was somewhat of a fun childhood, but there were some bad things too, but I had a good time.
Well, it was a wonderful place to grow up, actually, because it was a large piece of property and we used to really enjoy ourselves. We'd go up in the hills and run around. Your friends could come and have a good time. And it was a big house. It was a very nice place to grow up, actually.
I made life interesting, and being as though I was the youngest, and Bruce and Creighton had left when they were 18. They weren't there when I was a child. And Sydney left when she was 17 and I was 9. So after age 9, I spent with my mother and father, mostly my father, growing up in a beautiful ranch and a wonderful situation. We had this beautiful ranch in Napa, 120 acres, and it was absolutely stunning. It had beautiful trees and seasonal streams and so on. So my fun in the wintertime was to build big dams and then blow them up and have the water just go down and flood the barn. My father would get mad at me for that.
You know, we fought like cats and dogs at the house. You know, I think as brothers, I think we fought. But I'll tell you one thing, though. You get us downtown, or you got us at school, or you got us anywhere else other than home, and boy, if one brother was picked on or one was messed with, boy, we were there like we all backed each other up. I mean, we were pretty tight. But at home, I can remember sometimes the water hose getting out in the backyard just to separate us. But that's typical brother stuff, But no, I miss him.
Bart was into the movie thing, and he had his camera. He had a movie camera, and he was always out with that movie camera. He was never without it, and looking for a reaction or reacting to something on his own.
He was always interested in filmmaking, and he went to ACT acting school for a year, and he was just always interested in it. I don't know why. The first time he made a film, I did the camera work, and he had me up in the mountains with all his friends, and I was exhausted when I got home.
I've been at the ACT for 20 years, where my younger brother Bart had attended school in 1973.
George Lucas would be impressed if he saw the footage that Bart had put together. He had exploding stomachs, for when you get hit with a gunshot, pitchforks into the back. He did these horror films. And he was just in high school, but the guy really had a knack for filmmaking.
Bart, who was always into filmmaking, my mom it slipped.
I broke my back, and I didn't know it.
Had to call 911. Ambulance comes. Bart decides to grab the camera and get this on film.
The next morning I was paralyzed, and I never thought that I could have really injured myself. I knew that I had fallen, but I had fallen on carpeting.
And gets up onto the top of the roof, and instead of helping my mother, films the ambulance coming up the hill, the 2 paramedics coming out, walking into the house.
Anyway, I get in the ambulance, and the ambulance driver is shaking his head. He said, the weirdest thing, he said, we're being filmed. And I said, oh, he said, there's a boy on top of a garage filming this whole thing. And I said, that's just my son.
The next scene is my mom being gurneyed out and my mom lying on her back looking on the roof, and my mom saying, Bart, don't dare make me laugh. And getting wheeled out of the house while Bart's filming the whole thing.
We're up in Lake Tahoe, and Bart and Tim were messing around with the camera. I think we were saying goodbye or actually arriving. But one of the classic scenes is Bart getting in behind my mom is, unbeknownst to my mom, Bart is behind her and he puts his head into the camera.
So I was leaning over, putting the things in the trunk, and the next thing I know, Bart has photographed me from the rear end loading up. And he had made some kind of a video about that.
My father would come out and play basketball with my children. My dad had a real good eye for hitting the basket. Bart and Tim and the boys would play around the world basketball in the backyard. One day he came in and he was laughing. And he was laughing so hard. And I said, "What's the matter? What are you like?" He said, "I've got to tell you this one. Your children will say something to me to make me miss the basket. And sometimes it is bad, sometimes it's really bad, but this one is the worst." And I said, "What did he say?" He said, my dad was laughing so hard he could barely stop. Just before I went to shoot the basket, Bart said, "Did you know that our father raped Grandma?" Now you might have to edit that out. And my dad was laughing so hard. And I said, "Oh, I knew they were saying things out there."
On the airplane with Bart and Tim, and we had turbulence. And we hit this turbulence, and the plane shook. And Bart yells, "We're gonna die!" And the lady in front of us started doing this. "Ah!" And the whole plane started to panic.
Bart was always like the guy that was trying to con me, maybe Brent to some degree. And he came as like a team with Tim. It's like, I talked about how the boogeyman. And Bart was like the guy doing the hard sales pitch. Tim was like his accomplice. And I got the feeling that his older brothers conned him pretty good over the years. And this was kind of like his little payback.
We walked into McDonald's, and the person behind the counter says, "What would you like?" And Tim said, I just want a milkshake." And the person behind the counter said, "Do you want strawberry or chocolate?" And Tim turned over and says, "Yes." And he just walked away.
He would nickname my girlfriends. He called, I don't remember them off bat, but he'd take a feature of their body and call them by that name. Camel face, I think they called her, but she was not an ugly girl, but she had kind of a big nose because she was tall, and she was half Mexican and half Italian or something along that line, and a gorgeous girl, but she had a big nose.
Tim was just drop dead hysterical, but he was in a real nice way, He was never malicious.
Sitting at the dinner table in my household was, I wish there was a camera, because there were some laughs there. My mom says to this day that she had to leave the room because at the same time she wanted to discipline us, but she couldn't because we'd just break her out.
We're at the MGM Grand in Reno, and it was recently opened. So we went up there to enjoy it. And at the time they did have the highlight. I think they had it in Vegas too.
Highlight is like handball, but you bet on it like the horse races. And so we're there watching it, and people were betting, and all of a sudden they stop because the guy in front of us has a heart attack.
We're all sitting there getting impatient, and the announcer comes over the loudspeaker and says, "Sorry about the delay, and thank you for your patience."
And Tim reaches over and hits my father, Creighton, and says, "Patience? Get it? Get it?"
But that was Tim's sense of humor. And he's so quick, he picked that up right away.
I did run into a friend of theirs and in Fairfax recently who knew all the boys. And I said, I just was casual. They were talking about our kids, and I said, "I think they were kind of popular in school, weren't they?" And he said, No, that wasn't what it was. He said they were the funniest kids in school. They made a mistake at the school district one year to combine the 4th and 5th grades, and Bart and Tim were in the same class together.
You didn't want to put them, it was bad.
And then I thought, no, this is none of my business. I mean, the school is the one that is educating them.
They were in class together. That was bad. You didn't want to put them.
They would bounce off. One was the straight man, one was the comic, and they bounced off each other humor-wise. And so finally, Miss Meese was the teacher, and I would get dressed up purposely when I would go for these meetings because I wanted them to think that they came from a decent family. Towards the end of the school year, it was a disaster by this point, and towards the end of the school year, I went in. Miss Meese never said hello to me, never said anything. She just shook her head like this. And I said, would you like to know what their home life is like? And she said, no.
But my funniest memory of Bart was all of us hanging out, getting into our new cars and our hot rods, and a little ugliest old lady in the world I've ever seen in my life walks up to our group, comes within 7 to 8 inches of Bart, and she's just one of these most hideous looking old ladies I've ever seen in my life. Just something out of a horror film. And I remember looking at Bart going, Bart, turn around quick! And Bart turning around like this going, ah! I love that. I laughed so hard. I had tears coming out of my eyes for a half hour. She was right behind him, this close. I go, Bart, turn around. He went like this, ah! That was so funny. Oh my God, did Bart jump. It was like I seen a cartoon. It was so funny. That was one of my favorite stories I'll never forget in my life.
My aunt came out to visit me from Chicago, and she was kind of nervous type, and we were coming around a curve in the road, and Bart was a movie maker, and he had a life-size dummy, and it was just part of our furniture. And you'd find it, and, you know, it's just part of the house. And so this one day we're turning around a curve, coming up our hill as the dummy is being dropped off the hill. So all you see is a complete body coming down, and my aunt almost had a nervous breakdown.
And we'd be sitting down in the family, down in the rumpus room we called it, which was the room off the bedroom that the cousins used to live in, and we'd be sitting around, and all of a sudden you'd be having this conversation, and then all of a sudden this dummy would come flying off the roof, and then a rope around with a noose hanging in the front of the window. And of course it would be Bart and Tim on the roof.
Bruce and Creighton's Aunt Ruth was over, stayed with us, and Weller had died. And she was in the bedroom, get in bed, and she was talking to somebody. And I walked in and I said, Ruthie, who are you talking to? And she looked over, and of course the dummy was sitting in a chair. And she was talking to the dummy because her eyesight had gone a little bit, you know. And I said, Ruthie, who are you talking to? And she said, well, who's sitting there? And it was the dummy.
They're funny together. And I think the funniest things I liked about Bart and Tim were when they were in middle school. I think back then they called it junior high school. Now we call it middle school. It's when they did these drama plays, and the giggles started. Oh my God. Not only did they start giggling on stage, and the rest of the cast started giggling from a chain reaction, but the audience laughed and lost it too, and me too. Everybody, I think, laughed in the whole stadium except the drama teacher. They're supposed to put on this beautiful Christmas play, and they just wrecked it.
We were in Lake Tahoe, and Bart and Tim decided we were going to make a movie where I get drunk and end up falling in the water off the pier. And of course, they come to my rescue. I loved hanging out with those guys.
Bart and Tim were at their peak of hilarity. You know, their interchange, as good as Bob and Ray, because they anticipated each other's conversation, and they respectfully waited for the punchline if the other guy was going to deliver it. I mean, it was the amazing chemistry. It was astounding.
They would probably plot against some teacher or something, but apparently, right in the middle of class, they would start this fake fighting, and the teacher just completely flipped out because they thought that they were really fighting. You know, brothers do that. And you know, it was something, you know, something right out of the Old West as far as the stuntmen go. You know, one guy hitting another and him falling over the chairs, and they made just a complete scene right in the middle of class. You know, and you don't do this in school. And you know, apparently they ended up in the principal's office quite a bit. But you know, I would have given him my right arm to see any of that.
Because Tim was a very quiet guy before his accident. It was amazing. And then he exploded. But he was just as funny, if not funnier, but a different style, a completely different style.
We were at Tim's funeral, and the hearse is late. You know, it's like 45 minutes to an hour late. And Matt turns to me and with the straightest face says, Tim's doing this.
Tim was endeared by all of my girlfriends because they knew that he had this missing part of his brain that wouldn't hold his inhibitions in, and they liked that because it meant that everything that came out of his mouth, he meant it totally. And that's what I liked about it too. It was wonderful because you and I aren't that way.
The accident had given him this ability to communicate whatever came across his mind. And a lot of times it wasn't the right thing to say.
He actually would hit on my girlfriends. I have my girlfriends come over, and I'd go to the store to get some food or something for dinner, and I'd come back and he's making out with them on the couch, for God's sake. Seriously. And of course he staged it. He told them that I would get really pissed if they did this, and it worked very well.
After his car accident, Tim moved up to Novato, had a trailer home. I lived in a condo down the street, watched after him. Basically, he kind of watched after me too, because it was during the party years, early 20s. Bart was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I pick him up every weekend and take him to my house in my apartment. Became very close with him, kind of watched him every weekend. I don't take any of those years back. I love my little brothers. They looked up to me.
Bart used to do this to me constantly. You know, he'd be talking to him, and all of a sudden he would just open his mouth, and a stream of spit would come out. They were able to spit without, the traditional style of spitting. I still to this day don't know how they do it.
Okay, I'm in the bar, all right, with Bart, and Bart and I hung out a lot. Bart and I were close. And we're in the bar, and we're with my dad. My dad doesn't want us to talk about the ranch, if there's any muddy. So I'm sitting with Bart, and the strangers are sitting next to us, and they go, I go to him thinking I was going to brag about the ranch. I go, have you ever heard of Milpitas? Bart's sitting next to me, right, listening to this. You ever hear about Milpitas? My dad's sitting right next to them going, oh, Matt, shut your mouth. We don't talk about the money, family money. And the guy goes, yeah, I've heard about Milpitas. Well, my name's Matt Milpitas. Bart didn't know I was going to say that. Bart lost it. He was about to say, oh, I own a ranch or something. I go, no, my name's Matt Milpitas. Got Bart crying on the floor. Thought I was going to brag about this stupid ranch. And I just said, no, my name's Matt Milpitas.
Bart developed schizophrenia. It tormented him for years. He was found drowned at a nearby lake. He was 23 years old. Tim was in a major car accident with a family friend. He was thrown from the vehicle and sustained massive head injuries. His friend was killed. Tim lasted several years after the accident, in which he became funnier and even more brilliant. Due to his head trauma, Tim died of a seizure at 26.
It was wonderful then.
Cappy was, he was my big brother. And I mostly remember Cappy, because he went back and forth between where he lived. But I remember Cappy finally, just because it's like you get all excited to have your big brother come home.
Cappy was Creighton's, his son from his first marriage.
Cappy was fun. Cappy was a good friend of mine, He's my cousin. We had a great time. Cappy and I were 6 months apart. I was 6 months older than Cappy. And Cappy and I were really good friends. And we got along really well. And we've known each other since birth. And I love Cappy.
Cappy and I were extremely close growing up. The Novato years, I can't really remember because I only went up till about kindergarten. But once to Los Altos, Cappy was in and out. He was down in Fresno. His mother lived down there. He taught me a lot of bad stuff, but also taught me a lot of good stuff. I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I turned to Cappy and I said, this bully has been really coming after me, quite a bit. And I'm scared to death. I don't want to fight this guy. And he said, Brent, everybody gets that feeling. That nervous feeling when somebody's coming after you. He told me, he said, you just got to stand up for yourself. And so I went to school the next day or 2 days later, and this guy approached me again and started giving me hell, and I just cocked back and I just laid one on him. And the guy whimpered off. The guy was in shock that I had hit him. So I took Cappy's advice and I got out of it. The guy never bothered me again.
Well, one year we hopped in a car, and Cappy was in the Navy in San Diego. And Cappy decided to come meet us up in Los Angeles. And we were at the LA Coliseum, and Stanford was playing UCLA. And Cappy shows up, Cappy was kind of a long hair kind of guy normally, but he was in the Navy, he had the Navy cut. Cappy showed up, and he was on like a 3-day leave, and Cappy's going at the beer hard. Invariably, little parts of his beer would fall off and pour on this guy. And I think at one point, Cappy even dumped an entire beer on the guy. Cappy happened to have, I believe, some marijuana. I think he had a joint. And he had these 2 guys sitting next to him, and Cappy, being a long hair, or former long hair, so Cappy breaks out the joint, starts smoking with these 2 guys. Well, somebody called the cops. The cops show up, they grab the 2 long hairs, and yank them off, because, Cappy's clean cut. It wasn't him. Well, it was Cappy's. Cappy brought the dope.
This is one of the stories. Creighton brought Cappy over one time. He was just a little boy. And Creighton said, I had 5 little boys under 5. I said, let's have some martinis and then we can get through this taking care of these kids tonight. And so I did. And then, of course, I was the one that put the 5 little boys to bed. And with many martinis under my belt. So I decided I couldn't do that anymore.
I remember just having fun with him as a younger kid. Just doing kid stuff, he's like a brother.
He was addicted to music. Every time you would see him, whenever he came up to Los Altos to see us, he would put on the record player and put on the headphones and just space out. He'd just completely disappear. He'd listen for hours and hours and hours.
We got good memories, and we had a lot of fun, particularly during the Novato period, when he was quite young, and just to throw the baseball around and do just simple things like that. And he was a happy kid, and you can see it in some of the movies we had. Just a happy kid.
Cappy was a big part of our lives. I particularly remember the happy times in Novato. Creighton would go and pick him up at the bus station, and he'd come from Fresno every few weeks, and he just adored you and Scott. He couldn't wait to come and be the big brother to you guys. It was his birthday, and I'd made this birthday cake for him. So I put it in the closet in Scott's bedroom. The ants had found the cake. There were millions of ants. Of course, they were a lot of them were stuck because they couldn't get out of the goo. I was horrified, but I took it out anyways. Oh, Cappy, your cake, look what happened, your birthday cake. It was a polka dot cake at that point, but it wasn't going to make any difference to him. He was always fun. He was such a cute little guy. Oh, we had good times with him.
We had one of our famous barbecues over in Milpitas. We entered the party, and we had a lot of beer left, so Cappy and I picked up one of the kegs and put it in the back of the car and drove down to Mountain View where my buddy lived. One thing that Cappy really loved was the way Matt talks. Matt has a language. It was like, what happened to your head? Did you get hit by a bus? It's disguising what you're really trying to say. I mean, what happened to your head? Did you get hit by a bus? we got down to Mountain View, and I started talking like Matt, and I could not stop talking like that. And Cappy started laughing, so of course that just goaded me on to do it more. And I just kept on going and going and going. And Cappy was falling apart. I was so proud that I was able to make him laugh that hard.
Cappy was in a car accident, which sent him to prison for 3 years. He was never the same, but he liked to think that no one knew of the anguish inside of him. After about 12 years on the outside, he decided he didn't want to live anymore. Cappy died in 1999. Yeah, Kit was a squatter. He did this for several years, and then he realized he could put things in his mouth. He got into yoga and modeling, of course. And his real calling was chair making, but that never seemed to pan out. And he realized that his real calling was in Band-Aids.
I enjoyed high-protein cereal, and it had to be in the blue box. Went on an event with Creighton and Cappy and Matt and myself, and we ended up eating dinner at Bunny's, and Bunny had made this beautiful roast beef dinner. Wonderful meal. And of course I got to the dinner table and I says, I don't want any of this crap. And Creighton gets in the car, being a great uncle that he is, and goes to the store, comes back, and he gets the green box. Well, I would only eat the blue box. And of course this just made Bunny livid. Making this beautiful roast beef dinner and carrots and, beautiful potatoes, and I didn't want anything to do with it. And Creighton coming back with the high-protein cereal and coming back with it, not only was she ticked at the fact that he left to go get it, but then he comes back with the wrong colored box, and she just said, hell with the damn kid.
Don't you go to bed and put the sheet over the top of the blankets and pull the covers up? Well, I guess I tucked the kids in that way, and your father took care of them one night and called me up where I was, and he said, how the hell do you ever put these kids to bed at night? I'm doing it wrong.
When I would go to sleep at night, you had to say goodnight to me, and you had to say goodnight to me in the right tone, and you had to say goodnight, properly. And there couldn't be too much break in good and night, and you just had to say it right, and you had to be standing just in the right place in the bedroom. It couldn't be too far halfway in the doorway or halfway out. And you had to be sincere when you said it. Creighton would get frustrated. And my mom and dad would get home and they'd say, well, how do you say goodnight to the kid? And of course they would show him, but Creighton never did get it right.
Kit was 5 years old and going to kindergarten, and my mother walked him down to the bus one day. And then as he got down to the bus, he took each kid and lined them up, and each kid lined up, did it. And my mother came back home and she said, I can't believe it. He got all those kids all lined up, ready to get on the bus, and they did it. So he was kind of the rock of the family.
Matt started out in weight management, which he seemed to enjoy, but he moved on to diving pretty quickly. Then did a rodeo, which he seemed to love quite a bit, and then fashion design, which he was really good at. And then baseball just never took off, but it was always one of his passions. And then sunbathing is where he ended up.
He and I greet each other with a Don't ask me what it means, it's just So if you pick up the phone and say hello, Matt, it's
With a picture where Matt is pouring the water out of the pail, just doing it over again with that silly grin on his face. And looking around and saying, where's his women? I mean, he's trying to say swimming, and it came out women. It looked like a 5-year-old was trying to find somebody to make a pass at.
Brilliant in math, absolutely brilliant in math. He and Kit were in a math class together, and the math test was passed out to Matt first, and by the time it got to Kit on the other end of the room, Matt had finished the test. He was just very good at math.
Yeah, Scott was he was a mirror maker. He made mirrors, and then he went into business with my brother Cappy, making suckers. But his real passion was landscaping. And then he moved on to winter events. He loved the snow. Then he gave a shot at acting, and he was an event planner, and he ended up a balloon maker.
I was a huge sports fan. I came out of the womb spouting statistics, probably. But apparently I was in first grade in Novato, and the teacher says, okay, raise your hand if you know who the first president of the United States was. And boy, I jumped up, raised my hand. I was so sure I knew this. And the teacher says, who was the first president of the United States? Well, at the time, the 49ers, who weren't very good, had a wide receiver named Gene Washington. And I blurted out that the first president of the United States was Gene Washington. And I still hear about that to this day.
But the first thing he would get would be the green sheet from the Chronicle, the sporting page. And he would be reading that first thing in the morning. I mean, he couldn't even read, but boy, that was what he would do right away.
And there I am running around the pool, doing this walk. It seems normal to me, but I guess I had kind of a funny run as a child.
And Scott was even cuter, especially with his run. Scott had this great run that can only be described by showing it in film.
So when I was younger, I really loved groundskeeping. I thought I could be one. I loved working in the yard, so I figured it was a natural. And then I took up dancing, which I thought I was really good at until I got into competition, and I got really upset that I didn't make it. Biking was a natural transition for me, and I went to my first race and had a blast, and went directly from there into race car driving. And after my first meet, of course, I got upset again because I didn't win. And after that, I just realized I didn't have the temperament for any of the arts, so I went into business.
One day you and I were having a fight. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were in the laundry room, and I was just getting so angry at you. I said, Brent, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, you got that right. And of course, she started laughing, and I started laughing, and the fight was over, finally.
That ended the fight right there. It changed a lot between us at that moment of truth.
But we're here at the condo here in San Francisco, Creighton and Sandy's condo. And I'm here, and Brent's here, and somehow Bruce enters the mix, and Creighton mixes up one of his famous batches of martinis. Everybody gets all loose over here, and Brent, to make things interesting, has quit smoking cigarettes. And he starts this routine at the condo. Oh, Mom, I need a cigarette. And, Sandy's a sucker for Brent, and Brent plays her like you can't believe. No, Brent, don't do it. It's like, okay, but I just need another drink. Okay, have another drink, just don't smoke. So this goes on all night long. I'm watching this. We go to Delancey Street for dinner. So Brent finally says to Mom, Mom, if I can't have a cigarette, I gotta do something crazy. Well, I saw this one coming a mile away. So Brent stands up in the middle of the restaurant, puts his hands on his hip, looks directly at Creighton, and in his loudest booming voice for the whole restaurant to hear says, Father, I have a confession to make. I'm gay. Mother gets the giggles. The whole restaurant's in shock. If it isn't like a minute later, over walks this bald, slightly feminine man and confronts Brent at the table and says, I don't appreciate what you did. I'm an openly gay man, and I'm here with my niece who just heard what you said. And Brent says, oh, relax, buddy. Oh, get over it. Relax. So he stomps off. Another minute later, his boyfriend comes over and asks Brent to go outside and fight. They both went outside. I don't know what happened. Nobody came back beat up, but...
But Brent had lipstick on.
Yeah, Brent.
When you were it was second grade, and you were really causing trouble to her. Disruptive. Mrs. Vieira says to you, Brent, if you don't behave yourself and settle down, I am going to send you to the principal's office. And you looked her square in the eye and you said, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Sure, yeah, I used to dabble in a little singing. I'm not very good.
I knew the Joneses the boat.
I've written a song or two.
She's my Aunt Sandy. Y'all can't bear not to clean it up. She's at the beach now.
Kit was, I don't know how Kit came up with this song, but somehow or other, he started singing it and everybody was dancing to it and the words were terrible.
One of the songs' title is called Sandy in My Pants.
That's my Aunt Sandy. She tried to pants me.
I mean, Sandy, and it really good, a wonderful, wonderful song. It's a love song, and it's a tribute to my aunt. And excuse me, I get choked up during this.
She tried to pinch me. That's the chorus. I'm okay now. My shrink was good. My shrink was good. I'm okay now. My shrink was good now.
Does this song ever end?
But the words, it rhymed together. It rhymed with Sandy. So he says, my Aunt Sandy, she tried to pants me.
My Aunt Ruthie pretty much raised Creighton and Bruce. I didn't know well or too well, but Ruthie I got really close to. Ruthie was around for many years after Weller had died, but she lived out at the ranch in Milpitas, very close to Creighton and my mom, and we used to go out there all the time. She used to come to see us in Los Altos. Terrific lady. She's from the old school, so she had a few prejudices, one being Democrats.
Aunt Ruthie and I used to have a lot of political confrontations, and they were confrontations. And we both started yelling, and we both had really diametrically opposed opinions on many subjects, particularly candidates.
Ruthie was a diehard Republican. I mean, she was a big Republican. And Creighton always wanted to challenge her, and they'd get into these horrible arguments.
And you can't believe it. I mean, they got very heated, but that's what political discussions are all about. I love that. And she did too.
And they would sit and they would argue just terribly. They'd have the most vicious arguments.
So I just met Sandy, and I brought her down to the ranch, and you know, they'd met her before, but Ruthie and I got into one of these yelling, screaming things, and Sandy thought we were really going, you know, really upset, and she left the room crying. I had to go out and get her and bring her back in and said, no, we do this all the time.
They'd get into screaming matches like you wouldn't believe, and all the women would hide underneath the blankets, and they'd had a good old time, but nobody else knew it. They thought they were ready to kill each other.
But and then Ruthie was, you know, she was something else. She was, she thought, you know, we walked on water. I mean, she was an incredible woman, and always remember her having our paintings or pictures that we colored, and she'd frame them, and just one fantastic lady.
My mother would say, can I get you something? And you say, no, I'm fine. And she would say, well, it's no problem. I can, you know, just make you some eggs or something. Mom, I'm not hungry. You know, I don't want anything. Okay. Well, you know, I can make some hash browns, you know. Mom, I'm fine. You know, I really don't want anything. I can make a sandwich. Mom, I don't want anything. I swear to God, I'm not hungry. I do not want a thing. Do you hear me? Hello? You know, okay. What, would you like a Coke?
She came in here like the Vestal Virgin, you know, and she's put up with all these outrageous situations that went on over time, you know, your crazy Thanksgivings, the let's drink instead of eat Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas, you know what I'm talking about. For the most part, Jones men can handle their booze, although I'm sure it's all changing as we get older. But we can throw, at least we used to, be able to throw them down and throw them down and throw them down and throw them down. Well, my mother has never been able to do that. Or maybe she did better. Hopefully she did better then than she does now.
My mom has put up with more crap throughout the years. When they were married, my mom came from Colorado, and out there was a little bit more of a conservative atmosphere.
When Cappy was here, he used to take Matt and myself and Cappy out quite a bit when we were younger. I remember trips to the zoo, movies. Oh, he used to take us to the movie theaters. We used to watch the old original black and white Batman movies, the Marx Brothers. I mean, we'd spend the whole day in a theater.
I remember when the three kids, this would be Cappy, Kit, and Matt, all got ice cream cones on a very hot day, leaving the zoo in my car, and of course, all over the place.
Completely trashing it, and Creighton not getting upset one bit.
Creighton would come over, and I remember looking out my bedroom window right now, and he's wearing a red and white checkered shirt. I mean, I got that picture. And he'd pick us up, and he'd take us to San Francisco, and we'd hang out in his apartment, spend the night, Kit, myself, and Cappy. He'd take us to the zoo. He's the greatest uncle I ever had. I adored him. Honestly. Creighton was the great, I can remember everything. It was before the Sandy days. Sorry, Sandy. But it was before the Sandy, and, you know, he did have some good-looking girlfriends. No, I'm just kidding. Sandy, seriously. Creighton
Had this car he bought, and it was probably a 1950-something or 60-something Chevy Impala, and he paid $250 for this thing. And he was all excited, and it needed some piece of metal that cost another 60 bucks that Cappy says, I can take care of this car and get it running for you. And it was hysterical because this is the car that parked out in front of our house, in the middle of what are now multi-million-dollar homes. You know, the neighbors are got Mercedes-Benz, this, that, the other thing. And not only was this car old and cost $250, to get out of the car, the door handle didn't work. So Creighton had to roll down the window, and actually the handle on the window was broken. He had to jimmy the window down, and he'd have to reach outside the door and open it up to get in and out of the car. And he parked that car out in front of our house. I don't know if any of our neighbors ever said anything, but I'm sure we brought the home values down, and I know Sandy was embarrassed.
Faye was an interesting character because she did have a good sense of humor, but I think she did resent the fact that we were kids from a previous marriage, which I think is fairly normal, you know, so I certainly wouldn't hold that against her. But she really kind of worked at giving us a bad time, you know, for many years. But we didn't, you know, it didn't bother us that much. And this is, I think Bruce referred to this too, this is what brought Bruce and I so close together. We were good, he was, you know, and still is, my best friend. Bottom line, let's call it what it is. And that was the big positive that came out of it. Dad walked into the living room and pointed at a bag under the Christmas tree, and he said, are those Weller's nuts? And Faye said, well, I hope not. And everybody fell apart, except Faye. She didn't realize she'd said anything that funny.
I was very homesick. I had come out from Chicago and I was very homesick, and I had just been fired from my first job here in San Francisco, and I was kind of depressed. And I met Bruce and I started laughing and started having a good time. And he kind of pulled me out of my depression because we started laughing and having a good time, and I went out and got another job. He probably saved me from going back to Chicago, if you want to know the truth.
He would start doing Singing in the Rain, and he would kick the lamppost, and it was the funniest thing. You know, you'd just sit back and go, he'd go, I'm singing in the rain, and then he would kick the lamppost, and he wouldn't really twirl around it like, you know, like Gene Kelly, but he would make a scene, and it was just the funniest thing.
And I came from a wonderful family. I mean, just to mention, my folks are just the greatest people in the world.
The parents, all my friends love them. They did think they're great. They think my mom and dad are like one of the gang. They were great. They really were. In high school. Just, we were a little stressful when we were younger. You know what I'm saying, right, Mom? All right.
I am fortunate and grateful to have grown up with some of the funniest people around. The Joneses have a unique sense of humor that I am sure will continue to be passed down for generations to come. I want to dedicate this documentary to my cousins Bart and Tim and my brother Cappy. We all miss you tremendously. To the next generation of Joneses, don't take life too seriously. We all handle family tragedies differently. Ours is, and always will be, through humor and reflection. You don't realize it now, but life is short, and I urge you to see as much of the world as you can. On the special features of this DVD, you'll find more information about our families and where we are now in 2007. I hope you enjoyed this documentary on the history of our humorous family. In the words of the comedy team of Bob and Ray, hang by your thumbs and write if you get work.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing. Somewhere beyond the sea, she's there watching for me. If I could fly like birds on high, then straight to her arms I'd go sailing. It's far beyond a star, it's near beyond the moon. I know